This project contains subject matter that some may find to be disturbing or triggering. While I try to remain simplistic in my recounting of certain details, there are individuals who may still find the content concerning or upsetting. Please watch with proper discretion. Thank you. To say that my life has been full of trials would be an understatement. I think this is true for anyone who's been diagnosed with a serious, life-changing mental illness. And for me, that journey has been far longer than most. To provide a brief background, I've experienced visual and auditory hallucinations for as far back as I can remember. During childhood, I excused them because I had grown to believe that they were normal, and were, in fact, the complete embodiment of imagination, a special power that children possessed to see and hear a world that adults couldn't. For many years, I was able to function on that belief, come good or bad, living through my experiences as if they were just part of everyday, ordinary life. That was until I became a teenager, and that theory was finally put to rest. Once my views were contested, and I found out that what I was experiencing wasn't, in fact, an experience shared by those around me, I began to decline. It was during that time that my family first began seeking answers, and I had my first documented break from reality. This is when a person with schizophrenia completely loses touch with reality, often accompanied by an increased amount of delusions or hallucinations. After many years of searching and praying for knowledge, I was finally given the full diagnosis of schizophrenia, which would have been childhood schizophrenia had I reached a competent team of psychologists and psychiatrists in time. This diagnosis would be followed up by multiple med trials and subsequent hospitalizations. Sometime after that, my diagnosis would be reviewed and broadened to schizoaffective disorder, a combination of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder in which the sufferer experiences hallucinations and delusions, along with mood changes including drastic highs and lows. I was then put on a medication specifically for the treatment of schizoaffective disorder, but I had very little marked improvement as a result of that change. However, up until that point, it was the only medication I'd taken that had shown any sort of promise. So, I continued to take it and stopped trying all other medications. Even when new medications came onto the market, I stuck with what I knew, and I was unwilling to change. At the time, I had truly believed that staying the course may be my only workable option. And, as time went on, even when offered other medications, I refused to begin another trial, becoming averse to the whole process since it had only brought me disappointment. Near the end of the year 2022, fast on the heels of a drastic life change, I began to decline once again, and things finally came to a head. I had been barely managing to maintain my condition living alone for the first time in my life, and it was during that time that I experienced a particularly large and dangerous break from reality, unlike any that I'd experienced at home for a handful of years. During this time, I fell into a pit of psychosis and began to believe that I was living in a dream. I wandered the streets early in the morning, slept on the floor, forgot to keep track of important dates, lost track of time, failed to take my medications as prescribed, became self-injurious, and lost the tenuous grip I had had on my own personal sanity. As things continued to worsen, I expressed the dire parameters of my situation to multiple family members, explaining to them that nothing mattered because we weren't living in reality anymore. Instead, we were living in my dream, and that the only way to escape that dream would be for me to die. I know at the time that my family was concerned, but I believe that they truly thought that the period would pass and I'd come out on the other side. However, unfortunately, this wasn't the case. Having been spottily taking my meds when I could manage to remember them, my condition quickly began to spiral, going from bad to worse. I began harming myself on a regular basis, leaving trails of evidence throughout my unkempt home. I started to play with the idea of facilitating my own death, sorely believing that if I did so, I could wake up and return to the world that I'd left behind. During that time, I was actively standing in front of traffic, making unwise decisions, refusing to eat, and rarely caring for my own personal needs. And while my animals were taken care of during this time, they were the only ones receiving personal, day-to-day care and attention. My family visited briefly a number of times and bore witness to my decline. However, at that point, they felt as if I'd recover on my own given enough time, and they didn't want to make any drastic changes to my life. During one morning, I reached out to my mother via a phone call and asked her to help me end my life. I believed that it was only a matter of time before I would die in my dream, since most of my nightmares ended along such lines, and that I wanted to facilitate my death by my own means. So, my mother agreed to come help me, although she hadn't verbally expressed how. I spent an entire day waiting for her with bated breath. However, when she showed up that evening, instead of doing as I'd hoped she would, she had brought me one of my anxiety medications and had hoped that I'd take it and at least sleep well for one evening. When I became unreasonable and agitated, she left, and I was once again on my own. Both of my parents contemplated calling an ambulance that evening to have me involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility, but neither had the heart to make such a call. Unfortunately, it was this move that put my life in danger, because the next morning I left my house with no plans of returning. My memory grows incredibly foggy around this time, so I haven't the finer details of how the morning proceeded. I do, in fact, remember leaving my house, but I can't specifically recall many chronological events after that. However, through cross-referencing of the day's contents from multiple perspectives, I can now tell you what we assume happened after I left my residence. While it's not necessarily known how far I traveled during the time I was out, my phone was pinged in multiple places many blocks away from where I currently live. Then, it's assumed that after I sent one final text, I turned off my phone, because it then became untraceable. My final message was sent to my family's group chat and read something along the lines of, "Just wanted to message you, not that it really matters anymore. Either way, I guess I'll see you on the other side. Goodbye, all." My sister was the first reported person to read this text, and she immediately alerted the rest of my family. But by the time that my younger brother had reached my house to come check on me, I was already long gone, and he was left to take in the horror that I'd left behind. It's hard to describe exactly what he walked into when he entered my house, but I do know that during the time I was declining, I hadn't cleaned anything up. That ranged from dishes to garbage to the floors to copious amounts of blood left behind after multiple incidents of self-injurious behavior. I'm told the place looked something like a crime scene, and that once he discovered that, the real panic ensued. My family and friends gathered at my house, and after seeing the interior, immediately made a call to the local police. Law enforcement arrived at my residence, and a search was mounted to locate me and bring me back to safety. However, given the fact that my phone was switched off, and the last pinged locations show me all over the map, the search was arduous from the very start. Family friends arrived to wait at my house in case I returned. My family mounted multiple search efforts that spanned throughout the immediate vicinity, showing my picture to anyone who may have seen me, and police converged upon every point where my phone had pinged, searching houses, neighborhoods, and even local businesses. Meanwhile, I had ended my travels at a local Walgreens where I'd locked myself in one of the bathroom stalls, where I would remain silently for many hours. We're not entirely sure whether I'd caused some of my injuries beforehand, or if it was all sustained while I was there, but I'd caused significant harm to both of my ankles and lower legs. In my memory, I had been planning to take my own life once I'd found a suitable place. However, before I could do so, I'd caused harm to multiple other locations on my body, out of confusion and desperation. During my time in that bathroom stall, my mind had zeroed in on the goal of my trip, and I'd begun to panic, descending into a dissociative episode, which had seen me through the next few hours in a catatonic position, seated on the toilet in the Walgreens bathroom. During this time, a helicopter was scheduled to take off so that an aerial search could be launched, as the afternoon drug on without any sight of me. But before that could happen, an employee at the Walgreens I was hiding in came to use the bathroom for the second time that day, and noted that she'd seen the same pair of shoes situated in the adjoining stall for a handful of hours. Concerned, she tried to ask after me, but at the time I was still dissociating and wasn't able to hear her. She gathered her manager to come help assess the situation, and when he was also unable to reach me, he made the call to 911, requesting an ambulance for an unresponsive client locked in a bathroom stall. The police arrived first to assess the situation after being tipped off by the call to 911. One of the officers actually climbed under the bathroom door so that she could unlock it, and they attempted to get me to converse with them. But in the commotion, I'd come to and was now panicking and beyond their reach. Shortly afterward, the paramedics arrived on location, along with my family and the officers who'd been conducting the search for me. The paramedics attempted to move me from my position, but every time they'd make contact, I'd jerk away from them, so they left me there for a while to regroup. In that time, they were able to note physical harm on my body, and it was made known to my family that I needed to go to the ER to be seen. My family had truly hoped that they'd be able to locate me, offer me the medication that I'd missed, and take me back to their house to recover. But given that I had multiple injuries that needed attention, that option was taken from them. It took a handful of cops and multiple paramedics to finally remove me from that bathroom stall because I was so upset. And unfortunately, when you're that unmanageable, they are required to restrain you for their safety as well as yours. The cops remained present, even following us into the ambulance to make sure that we could travel safely. However, once there, I had already been able to slip my way free of some of the restraints, and they made the decision to use another pair of hard restraints on top of the soft ones I'd already been restrained in. Given the fact that I was still incredibly confused and irate, they forcefully subjected me to a sedative and started an IV line against my will. Then I was taken to a local ER and transferred into their overnight holding. I honestly don't remember much up until arriving there, so my memory only truly picked up a few hours later. That night, however, was one of the worst of my life, and I slept on a bare mat in an empty room without so much as a pillow or a blanket, access to food, or the use of a bathroom. The next morning, I was rudely shaken awake, and when I rose in a blind panic, I was being surrounded by nurses and doctors who were there to take my vitals and ready me for transfer to a psychiatric hospital many miles away. But unforeseen circumstances halted their plans as my heart rate had spiked to an unimaginable level and wouldn't come down. They tried to start another IV line, but at that point I was so shaken that I wouldn't allow anyone to touch me. So instead, they brought me fluids to drink and unfairly instructed me to calm down for my own betterment or suffer the consequence of spending another day there instead of being transferred. Hours later, they changed their story and decided to give in, allowing my transfer to commence even though my heart rate was still higher than they'd like. After that, I was restrained once again by a new team of paramedics and taken a few hours away by ambulance to a specific psychiatric hospital that would accept my insurance. Once I arrived there, I was to remain for 3 days on a hold since I had been engaging in self-harm behavior. However, after arrival, my case was tossed around for over a week before a solid treatment plan was put in place. During my second week there, I was given an ultimatum. The team wasn't happy with my progress, and my parents didn't think I was ready to come home. So they told me that if I wanted to be released, I needed to have my medication adjusted. The idea was that I needed to stabilize, and hopefully, if I was able to find the right medication, I could begin managing my symptoms better than I had been during the last 10 years. Initially, I was against the idea, as I'd already been through countless med trials as a young adult, and wasn't on board with this change. However, I did finally relent, wanting to be able to come home and get back to the life that I'd left behind. At this point, I was fairly certain that I was no longer in a dream, but things did still feel off and I hadn't really fully recovered. Regardless, the next evening, I decided to start a med trial with a brand new medication for the first time in almost a decade. That night was rather rough. I ended up having a dissociative episode that led to another panic attack, which nearly derailed our plans. However, the next morning, I was able to have some clarity and confidently continued to take the new drug over the next few days. Slowly, the staff began to note improvement, and shortly thereafter, I was finally scheduled for release. My mind was far clearer than when I'd come in. I'd begun to socialize with the other patients, making a lot of wonderful friends. I was making all of my group therapy sessions, taking my meds on time each day, and I was even managing my own self-care. These were all the signs that the care team needed, and during the end of my second week at the hospital, they finally allowed me to leave. It was that day that my father came to pick me up, and I was able to come back to the home that I'd left behind that fateful day that I'd disappeared. My family did a wonderful job of cleaning the space, even bringing in specialists to erase all the signs of harm that I'd covered the house in. It was a new, fresh start, and now that I no longer believed that I was trapped in a never-ending dream that became more of a nightmare, things looked brighter and more positive. Today, almost 150 days later, I'm glad that I was able to go through a controlled med trial at that hospital. These days, I hallucinate very rarely, and a few of the key symptoms that had driven me up the wall have almost disappeared. I no longer feel bugs crawling over my skin at all hours, or see them traveling up the walls or falling from my ceiling. The voices that had been my constant companions and the visual hallucinations have all died down as well, allowing me to actually experience complete silence in intervals for the first time since I can remember. The medication that I'm on now is a far newer drug that treats not only schizophrenia as a whole, but also has a grand effect on mood disorders like bipolar disorder. So it targets both of my issues at once and also affects both drastically, unlike the medication I'd been on before. During my stay at the hospital, the plan had been to get off of my old medication and transfer to this new one. However, during my time there, it became apparent that I couldn't switch off of my old med. The new one simply wasn't heavy enough in certain regards. When we'd tried to go down on the dosage of my original med, I'd gone back to having trouble at night, and my sleep was strongly affected. Given that I'd been on this old medication for many, many years, my team felt as if it was alright for me to continue taking it along with the new med, so long as I wasn't seeing adverse effects. So I was released with a reduced dose of my old med, and a prescription for the full dose of my new medication as well. These days, I can honestly tell you that I've come farther than I ever thought possible. I'm sharing this story right now after a few months of very intense therapy and medication management, because I want to inspire others, and I finally feel ready to share this story in its entirety from start to finish. It's taken me quite a while to collect all this information, but now that I have it all laid out, I hope that this is helpful to anybody who might be listening. My circumstances were bleak, and if I hadn't been found when I was, where I was, then I do truly believe I would have ended my life. Police had actually found multiple weapons in the backpack that I was carrying, and the text that I'd sent my family, which they had reviewed, clearly reflected my intentions. This may be hard to hear, but all of those really horrible events eventually led towards a moment that was filled with more freedom than I'd ever known in my life up until that point. Even though the events of those few weeks were terrifying and definitely fraught with worry, they were stepping stones on the path that led to my final destination. If you're listening to this story today, I really want to encourage you guys to keep fighting. Each day is a new opportunity to reach toward a future that outshines the past. Don't let anything keep you down, and when life hits you with a wave of tragedy, know that on the other side is relief, so long as you don't let that wave drown you. Stories like mine are prime examples of what can happen when you let go and let God carry you through the dark times. Only He can truly see the eventual outcome, so trusting in His knowledge, while it's hard, is something that ultimately brings about a lot of peace. I'm here today because of His provision, the quick work of my family and friends, and the assistance of my psychologist who urged me to try a new medication, despite my reluctance. If you're in a really dark place today, I hope this story can act as a bit of encouragement. It's taken me quite a while to put this project together, because honestly I was still gathering all the information and clarifying the parts of the story where my memory sort of blanks out. After everything I've been through, it's taken some time to come to terms with that. However, today I have a wonderful therapist who offers her assistance in that process, and I'm making progress with her each week. Never give up hope. On the other side of every storm lies clear skies and new opportunities. Don't treat tragedy like a dead end, but rather a tunnel, ferrying you toward a new destination. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to answer them as quickly as possible. Thank you so much for joining me for this project. I know it's been a long time coming. You guys have always been a tremendous help in supporting me when I have projects like this that do take a while, but that eventually come to fruition. If just one single person hears this and feels a little bit more hopeful than they had previously, then I promise you this entire scenario will be even more worth it. If it's possible that you're in a situation very similar to my own and you're experiencing similar things, please reach out to the people around you. Let them know what you're dealing with, let them know how dire the situation is, and don't make any split-second decisions on your own. The biggest advice that I can give to anybody is to keep from making large decisions when they're alone or when their mental state isn't where it should be. Take time to call a family friend, a doctor, your therapist, a psychiatrist that you've been seeing, or your psychologist. There's always someone out there who can assist you in your time of need. And if you feel like you don't have anybody like that you could reach out to, please know that the comments section is a free and open place for you to share your thoughts. As always, I can assure you it's a hate-free place. Thank you so much for joining me for this special project and for helping me to spread hope to the online community. Guys, this is Miles signing off. I love you all and stay awesome. Seriously, I love projects like this because I get to, talk about really deep subjects and stuff. But sometimes I finish and I'm like, oh, that was such a weight off my chest. Oh, I can breathe now. And then I'm listen to myself back on the recording. I'm like, oh, wow, you sound really dire. But I promise you, if this is the first video of mine you're watching, I'm not like that all the time. I'm seriously a really fun, excitable, bubbly person, okay? I just have to put on my serious tone for videos like this, because if I talk about these kind of things in the voice that I'm using now, well, it doesn't sit well with people. So thank you again for watching. This is the real Miles signing off. I don't know who recorded the rest of this video. She sounds really, really sad. She's not sad at all. She's fine. I love you guys. I don't know who watches these bloopers, but if you do, hi there. Okay, that's all. Bye. Bye.